So, what does democracy really look like? I mean, is it just about casting a vote for a national election every few years? Or is it something that happens much, much closer to home? On your street, in your village, in your town? Well, that's the whole idea behind local self government in India. It's all about bringing power directly to the people. All right, let's dive into this massive, incredible experiment in grassroots democracy. But before we get into all the laws and the different structures, we have to start with the vision. Because the push for local governance in India wasn't just some political strategy. No, it was a deeply held philosophical dream about what an independent India could and should be. And this quote right here, this is that dream in a nutshell. It's Mahatma Gandhi's concept of Gram Swaraj, which literally means village self-rule. I mean, just think about it. He imagined every single village as its own self-sufficient republic, managing its own affairs, providing for its own people, and running on cooperation, not exploitation. It's a really powerful and pretty radical vision of decentralized power. Yeah, that's the billion-person question, isn't it? It's one thing to have this beautiful, inspiring ideal, but it's a whole other challenge to actually build a practical nationwide system that can deliver on that promise. And let me tell you, the journey from that philosophy to actual policy was a long and complicated one. As you can see from this timeline, the idea of local government didn't just pop up overnight. Even during the British Raj, acts in 1919 and 1935 started setting up local bodies. But the real game changer? The moment this dream was literally written into the DNA of the Indian state. That came in 1992 with two huge constitutional amendments. So now let's get into how this vision was finally made real. Because 1992 really was a constitutional revolution. This is the point where local government went from just being an option, or maybe a state-level policy, to a mandatory, constitutionally protected part of India's entire democratic structure. So what were these twin changes? Well, formerly known as the 73rd and 74th Amendments, they weren't just ordinary laws. They actually added new parts to the Constitution itself, starting from Article 243. The 73rd Amendment dealt with rural bodies, that's the Panchayati Raj system, while the 74th focused on the urban ones, the Nagarpalikas. Together, they created a single legal framework to push democracy all the way down to the grassroots level. So how they do it? Well, it all rests on these four key pillars. First, they created a standard three-tier structure for the whole country. No more patchwork systems. Second, they made regular, direct elections mandatory every 5 years. Third, and this was a huge deal, they introduced reservations to make sure that marginalized communities and women would have a seat at the table. And finally, they actually listed out specific powers and responsibilities that should be handed over to these local bodies. And I really want to focus on this number for a second. 1/3. The provision reserving 1/3 of all seats for women wasn't just some small tweak. It was absolutely groundbreaking. Just try to imagine it. Practically overnight, millions of women were brought into the political process, many for the very first time in their lives. This completely changed the conversation at the local level, bringing totally new perspectives and priorities to the forefront. Okay, so the Constitution gives them power, it mandates elections, and it ensures representation. Sounds good, right? But what does that actually look like in practice, on the ground? What are these local governments actually responsible for? How do they pay for everything? And what are the real-world problems they're up against every single day? This gives you a great snapshot of what's on their plate. And we're not talking about abstract policies here. We're talking about the things that affect daily life for millions. Drinking water, local roads, the village school, primary health centers. These are the tangible, everyday issues that local governments are now empowered to manage. And of course, to do all that, they need money. Now, their funding is a bit of a mix. A decent chunk, especially in cities, comes from property taxes and other local fees. But as you can tell from the chart, a very, very large piece of the pie comes in the form of grants from the state government. And this can be a double-edged sword, It often creates a financial dependency that can really limit how autonomous these local bodies truly are. Now, let's circle back to that landmark reservation for women and look at the reality. The promise, as the source material says, was that it brought a new perspective and a greater sensitivity. And you know what? It absolutely did. But the problem is that this legal empowerment often smashed right into deeply rooted patriarchal norms. And that clash is why we see this issue of proxy representation, where male relatives try to effectively rule from behind the scenes. It shows that a powerful law can run headfirst into centuries of social conditioning. And this challenge of entrenched social structures isn't just about gender. The exact same dynamic plays out when it comes to caste. Just because you grant someone constitutional power, it doesn't magically erase centuries of social hierarchy. These reservations for marginalized castes can create a ton of friction because the traditional power centers often see this new empowerment as a direct threat to their influence, and they push back. So here we are, more than 3 decades later. What's the verdict on this massive experiment? Has it really brought democracy to everyone's doorstep? Let's take a look at the balance sheet. So the big takeaway here is that it's a mixed bag. On the plus side, we have a uniform structure for the whole country, millions of new elected positions have been created, and there's a definite increase in sensitivity and new perspectives in local politics. But on the negative side, those deep-rooted social challenges are still there. The tensions, the proxy rule, the friction. The constitutional framework is solid and in place, but making it actually work effectively on the ground, that's the ongoing struggle. And that really leaves us with this final critical question. We've successfully put the government closer to the people, but is just being close enough? This incredible experiment has proven that proximity is absolutely necessary, but it might not be sufficient to overcome those deep-seated social and economic challenges. Making local democracy not just present, but truly effective, well, that remains the great work in progress.